Imagine a world remarkably like our own. It is a world of global trade, international treaties, and complex economies. Kings send letters to foreign leaders calling them brother. Merchant ships cross the oceans carrying goods from thousands of miles away. It is an era of unparalleled wealth, art, and stability. And then, within the span of a single lifetime, the lights go out. Cities burned to the ground and never resettled. Writing is forgotten. The population plummets. Great empires that stood for 1,000 years simply vanish into the sand. For centuries, historians were baffled. Who had the power to kill the ancient world? Who were the mysterious warriors who arrived on ships, destroyed everything in their path, and left no trace behind? This is the story of the first apocalypse, the story of the ghost army that erased civilization overnight. To understand the horror of what happened, we first have to understand what was lost. Travel back with me to the late Bronze Age, around 1200 BC. If you looked at a map of the Mediterranean and the Near East, you wouldn't see savage tribes. You would see the G8 of the ancient world. You had the mighty Egyptians, the masters of gold and grain. You had the Hittites in modern-day Turkey, the masters of war and chariots. You had the Babylonians, the Mycenaeans in Greece, and the wealthy trading city of Ugarit. These weren't isolated islands, they were connected. Just like today, their economy relied on a global supply chain. To make bronze, the nuclear technology of the time, you needed copper from Cyprus and tin from as far away as Afghanistan. If one nation fell, the trade routes would collapse. If the trade routes collapsed, the weapons stopped being made. If the weapons stopped, well, you get the picture. But nobody was worried. These empires were too big to fail. They had massive armies, stone walls, and gods on their side. But then, around 1177 BC, strange reports began to arrive. It wasn't a declared war. There were no ambassadors sent to declare battle, just silence from the north, and then panic. Archaeologists have found clay tablets from this period that look like they were written in a rush. They were baked in the fires that eventually destroyed the cities where they were found. These are the last words of a dying civilization. Listen to this actual letter sent from the king of Ugarit to the king of Cyprus. My father, behold, the enemy's ships came. My cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country. Does not my father know that all my troops and chariots are in the land of Hatti? The country is abandoned to itself. The country is abandoned to itself. The king wasn't talking about a rival empire. He was talking about something else, something worse. The Egyptians called them the Sea Peoples. This is where the history becomes a horror story. The Sea Peoples didn't have a flag. They didn't have a capital city. They were a confederation of different groups with names that sound like riddles. The Sherden, the Shekelesh, the Peleset. They appear in Egyptian carvings as strange, terrifying warriors. Some wore horned helmets, others wore feathered headdresses. And they didn't just come to conquer, they came to erase. The dominoes began to fall. First, the Mycenaeans in Greece. Their great palaces were torched. The survivors fled to the mountains, and for the next 400 years, the Greeks forgot how to write. Imagine that, a society so traumatized that they forgot literacy. Next, the Hittite Empire, the superpower of the north, just ceased to exist. Their capital, Hattusa, was burned so thoroughly that the stones cracked from the heat. Then the swarm turned towards the last man standing, Egypt. Pharaoh Ramesses III prepared for the fight of his life. He knew they were coming. He lined the shores of the Nile with archers. He built a wall of ships to block the river mouth. The inscriptions on his temple walls tell the story. No land could stand before their arms. They desolated its people, and its land was like that which has never come into being. Egypt won the battle, but they lost the war. They spent so much wealth and manpower fighting the sea peoples that the Egyptian economy collapsed. The new kingdom ended, and Egypt began a slow, painful decline from which it would never fully recover. But here is the twist, the hook that has kept historians arguing for decades. For a long time, we thought the Sea Peoples were just a superior military force, a ghost army of Vikings before the Vikings existed. But recent science has revealed a terrifying truth. The Sea Peoples weren't just warriors, they were refugees. When archaeologists looked closer at the ruins, they didn't just find arrowheads, they found pollen samples. They looked at climate data. In the years leading up to 1177 BC, the Mediterranean was hit by a mega drought. Crops failed year after year. That global supply chain I mentioned earlier, it snapped. Without grain shipments, people starved. Then there is evidence of a massive earthquake storm, a series of tectonic shifts that leveled cities from Greece to the Levant. The Ghost Army, these terrifying sea peoples, were likely the displaced victims of this climate catastrophe. They were families moving on ox carts, desperate for food. They attacked the great cities not because they were evil, but because they were starving. The great empires fell because they were too rigid. They relied too much on international trade. When one piece of the puzzle was missing, the whole picture fell apart. It wasn't just an invasion, it was a systems collapse. The aftermath was brutal. This event is known as the Bronze Age collapse. It ushered in a dark age that lasted for centuries. Populations dropped by up to 75% in some areas. The sophisticated art, the diplomacy, the plumbing, it all vanished. Humanity hit the reset button. But in the ashes of the old world, something new was born. Because the old trade routes for copper and tin were broken, blacksmiths were forced to experiment with a new, uglier metal, a metal that was harder to work with, but much easier to find: iron. The destruction of the Bronze Age empires cleared the way for the Iron Age. It cleared the way for smaller, scrappier nations to rise up, nations like the Phoenicians and eventually the Romans. The Sea Peoples remain one of history's greatest mysteries. We still don't know exactly where they came from, but they taught us a lesson that is terrifyingly relevant today. No civilization is too big to fail. When the climate shifts and the supply chains break and the hunger starts, even the mightiest empires can turn into ghosts overnight. If you enjoyed this dive into the apocalypse of the ancient world, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We are exploring the timeline, era by era, uncovering the mysteries that history class skipped. What do you think? Was it the drought, the earthquakes, or the Sea Peoples that dealt the final blow? Let me know in the comments below. See you in the next era.